Hi, Harper. Thanks for joining me for Lead Time Chats.
Hello, thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about this topic that I know is near and dear to both of our hearts, which is tactical meetings. And before we dive too much into what those are, maybe just to start, we'll take a little trip down memory lane, and you could tell me a little bit about, what's your relationship to these types of meetings, how you were first introduced to them, maybe bring us back to Food Camp 2013.
That's so that it's such a funny thing, and in many ways, this is going to sound ridiculous and maybe a little dramatic, but there definitely is a before and after with my experience of tactical meetings, and it's very dramatic, and but it is true. So I had worked in tech for quite a while and had been in normal, you know, tech companies, from very big companies to startup types to insane companies, insane being threadless, where it just didn't have any rhyme or reason oftentimes. And there was this lacking of structure. Either there was way too much structure, or that structure didn't make sense, like structure that seemed to be about building a report more so than seemed about building like productivity. It was structure
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't necessarily about making sure that you were working on good things or getting things done, or there was just a lack of structure. And I think it was like and I had this strong like um, reaction to like agile kind of methodologies that it just didn't really fit with the teams that I was either working on as an individual contributor or the teams I was building. And so a lot of like the tooling around all this stuff just didn't really fit with what we were doing. And this is the time of
Mm,
like pivotal tracker and all this kind of
yeah.
fun stuff. And it just didn't fit. And it wasn't that we couldn't make it fit, but how we were working, especially because we were oftentimes creating, we were we were doing things where you have all these people that were coming in and we'd also I had just gotten done with the Obama campaign, which was an
Mhm.
insane experience of um, stress and a little bit by any means necessary, where you just got it done, and you got it done despite maybe your values or kind of
Mm,
what you thought was the right thing to do. You just were like, okay, like for instance, um, you know, we read these articles about like how you should work pretty structured hours, and like working really long hours decreases productivity, and I would just be like, nope, we're working long hours. like so
right.
so
You've got a
so it's
few
just
months left. Like,
yeah. And so it's like all of these things that I knew were bad were these habits that we had picked up and were doing. And so we just started Modest, our company. We'd been doing it for about 6 months, I think. And we had these team meetings that were weekly, because it's a very small company. And we had these team meetings, and they were just taking forever. And it was just wandering. It was like this nice hangout, wandering meeting that took 3 hours, and it was driving me crazy. It was driving everyone crazy, because it was important, because we were trying to like talk about what we did that week. We were trying to talk about
right.
issues, and it's like very high information density, but probably very low signal to noise, like a lot of noise.
Hmm.
Um, and more importantly, at the Obama campaign, we had a pretty bad team when it comes to diversity. Like we had
Mm,
pretty much, and this is obviously comes from my mistake, but we had a pretty white male team, and by
hmm.
pretty I mean very white male. So so when we started Modest, we were like, okay, well, obviously we fucked that up. We have to change our perspective on how this is, and so we started thinking like, what are the things that we can do internally, not just externally with hiring, but internally for the
Mm,
company to try and make things more accessible to all different types of people. And that meant like anything from an introvert to an extrovert to
yeah.
a person of color to someone who just works differently than we do, because we just wanted to create a cradle that could hold anyone, not something that just held like extroverted white male dudes with red beards. Like that was our perspective. And so we'd done all this work, and then I went to food camp, and you hosted a session. Do you remember what it was called?
I think it was maybe like effective meetings or something.
Yeah,
Is
and
that
it just
right?
was like this. I think it's not, I was trying to remember, but it was this thing of like, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to go to this, because right now my life is full of meetings that are meetings, but they're not effective. And it wasn't
Hmm.
that they
Or
weren't getting
efficient,
it.
maybe. It was either effective or
I
efficient
think it was
meetings.
whatever it was something that just dragged me. I was like, yes, let's do this. We will go and learn. Like it was this very exciting thing. And I remember going, it was outside in a tent.
Yeah.
And what was interesting about this was you ran the meeting, you ran the session like you would run a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very clear and very high information, but very efficient and very high signal.
Mm-hmm.
I bet if I went upstairs, I could find the notebook that I had and I wrote my notes in. Because what I remembered about that, and for those of you who've been at like unconferences are full
Oh
of
my God.
unstructured sessions where it's just like
Yeah.
a fire hose of
Like,
information.
and then two people end up talking for an hour and everyone's just sitting there being like, God, I wish someone would shut these people up.
Yeah, well, and it might be really compelling or interesting. You might not want them to shut up, but it's like this weird information that is like very hard to. Very hard to discern if you're getting anything by it. And I actually can measure a
Mm-hmm.
lot of my productivity within a meeting by am I able to take notes? um,
Mm-hmm.
am I able to have action items come out of this conversation? And what I
Mm-hmm.
found is just in this one quick little session, I was able to very quickly be like, blah, 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 write my notes in such a way that I was able to take that back and tell my co-founder Dylan, "Eureka! We found something. We've struck gold!" Like, and really, what it was like this idea of we can do our meetings differently. You gave me permission to change how the meeting was ran, which I had
Mm-hmm.
never really thought about. I think it's silly to say now because we've talked about meetings a little bit more since then, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'd ever thought about adding structure to the meeting. I just don't think that was a tool that I really had to pull out, like to say this is let's make the meeting structured. Like obviously taking notes or having an agenda, but those are things that were like mythical beasts. Like
Yeah.
maybe one day you would take notes in a meeting, but I was like, well, who would do it? Like
Right.
how do you find out that what I don't want to do? I have terrible handwriting, and then you have all these like things you start thinking about well, maybe my notes wouldn't be good for everyone else, and all this other stuff. And then there was the question of like um, just structure. Like I want to give everyone an opportunity to talk, and most of the structure I had seen takes away opportunity. Um,
Mm.
and this idea of accessibility, of making sure that everyone can participate, and especially when you work in a a company or a group or a team that just have different types of people communicate differently. Some
Yeah.
persons will talk really loud and be excited and maybe aggressive, or not like aggressive in a bad way, just very out there pushy. And other people will want to be quiet and not, and but their ideas are oftentimes equal. Yet
Mm-hmm.
in typical meetings, what we found is that their ideas were not treated equally. It was oftentimes the person who could aggress their way through being the person to talk loudest, or was able to, get in front or what have you, and almost honestly coerce the control away from the meeting, from the group into the singular person. Um,
Yeah.
and I resembled that remark in a lot of ways. Like I was that person in some ways, and I think in some ways that was how I perceived that was what I perceived you had to do as a leader, right? Was to be louder, or to be, and I didn't want that to be the team, because I didn't. It became clear to me that that kind of behavior was almost a bad actor.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was something that was detrimental to having good cohesion of the team and the product and really understanding. And the real reason is we had people on the team that I wanted to have as strong a voice as me, as the CEO, and they might be a junior engineer or a product
Right.
designer, or not even on the product team. Like the admin that was the office manager. Like it could be like all of these things mixed together. Um, you want all of those people to have an equal voice, um, not equal in regards to general like authority, but equal in that meeting, in that
Like raising,
conversation. Yeah,
yeah,
and
raising
and
ideas
and
and not
and some
having to push over, like, let me interrupt this person to
right,
speak in a meeting, because the default is this person's going to be speaking the whole time.
right, and that to go back to the dramatic part, that really did change everything for how we ran meetings. Was running this meetings, and we used to call it like holacracy light. Like
Mm-hmm.
we started engaging the holacracy people to like come in and like do the consulting and bring us through the process.
Mm-hmm.
And I had spent a tiny bit of time with talking to Ev about this, and like a tiny bit of time talking to a handful of other folks that were deep in the holacracy world. And we like circles and all that. We didn't really go down that path. I think our team was very small, so
Yeah.
it wasn't as needed. If we had a much bigger team, I think it would have been different. But also we just didn't want to pay for it.
Yeah.
Quite honestly, it was
We
really
went, I mean,
expensive.
at Medium, we went deep, deep down into that path. And then when we emerged, we were like, okay, what were the good parts?
Hmm.
Meetings, right? Like meetings, clear, like clear role definition, and like this. I mean, just for our listeners, just to put it in, make it a little bit clearer, like the tactical meetings we're talking about, like there's an agenda, but it's not an agenda like someone sends an agenda out in the calendar invite, right? You dynamically create an agenda, you go around the room, everyone has a chance to add, one or two words to the agenda, and then you process them one by one so that, so say if I have an agenda item, I'm like, a vacation, right? And then I say, oh, I'm going on, I'm going to be out for 2 weeks. Here's what I'm doing to like set the team up. And then you're like, oh, actually, can we talk about the general vacation policy? Then the facilitator might come in and be like, Harper, that sounds like a separate agenda item. Do you want to add it to the end? So you don't get this like spiraling rat holing effect that often happens at meetings where people think like, oh, while we're generally talking about this topic, let's just like kind of add on, right? That always goes to the end. So that's kind of the, just to be clear, like the core part of this type of meeting that we're talking about. And then at Medium and at Range, we also have a opening and closing round, and then like different sections, which I can show you later. But that's kind of the core of it, that like you want to get to a next action, even the smallest incremental next action, as quickly as possible. You want to record notes, capture the actions, and then revisit them.
And what this did though was, this is at Modest, so this is 2013. And
Mm-hmm.
what it did was it took our 3-hour wandering meeting down to 30 minutes.
Oh my
And it
God.
was largely 30 minutes with 5 people, and it was 30 minutes with 20 people. And we went to, when PayPal bought us, it was 30 minutes with 50 people.
Wow.
And there were times, of course, that we expanded it. So we added
Mm-hmm.
demos, we added like
Yeah.
some various team check-ins, we added all sorts of things there. And the benefit, and what just, it made me so happy, was in 2013 I was traveling a lot around, talking about the work that we did on the Obama campaign. We were hiring all over the United States, and we had this like very distributed team. It was an amazing team, and they all lived in different time zones. They would wake up at different times. They would have different work
Mm-hmm.
kind of schedules. Some people had kids, so they'd work later at night after the kids went to bed, and in the middle of the day when the kids were at school or what have you, but not earlier and not towards the afternoon. And it was just like this kind of interesting perspective on, I wanted the people to work how they could work, and every single meeting. And if I, had access to my Modest email right now, every single meeting had notes, so
Mm-hmm.
you could kind of replay. It was kind of this like append only database of our company. Everything was there. Like you could look back and say, why was this decision made? And you could actually look back and see, why was this decision made?
Mm-hmm.
Which, as a new employee, we could say, oh, here's this Google group. Just rock through it. Like it could work in
Mm-hmm.
this very interesting way. And of course, there are some things of like, handing a new employee 7,000 emails from 7,000 meetings is probably not the most gentlest of onboarding. But what we found is it wasn't about saying, here, read this before you get going. It was more, with a quick search in an inbox, you can
Mm-hmm.
find, oh, like Harper mentioned this thing about this thing, and like about the build server, about whatever it might be.
Right.
And then we also then use the same note style to send both company updates for then OPSI kind of things, and then also when we're doing fundraising or customers, like various pitches, whatever it might be. And so the team became very accustomed to having this access to this data about how things were going, that
Mm-hmm.
whenever things got hard, everyone was on the same page. There was no one that
Mm.
was like, oh, I thought this was going, because there was access to all this information.
Right. I wasn't in that room, or right.
Right. Well, that was the thing, is you didn't have to be in the room.
Right.
And that
Yeah.
was the key, because it was this thing of like, okay, so first of all, the first thing was it created an opportunity for access. more people could participate in a real way.
Mhm.
It created an opportunity where even if you were of low authority in the company, you had a strong voice. You could,
Mhm.
which allowed for change to come from anywhere, for innovation to come from anywhere. And then the other thing was you could be anywhere in the world. As long as you largely had access to email, you knew what was going on. Um,
Mhm.
and it was just great. And we tried a lot of things. We tried snippets. We tried a lot of these kind of tools. And the thing that really stuck with us and still sticks with us, and a lot of the people have spun out, gone on their own way. And that type of meeting has kind of
Yeah.
stuck with a lot of us, and it's continued on. We tried to bring it into PayPal, and it worked to some extent. It's a big org. And I
Yeah,
actually
we've
do
had
not
the
know.
exact same experience at Medium where people, we've got some people at Airbnb running I mean, because after you have this experience, I mean, I was really concerned when I was leaving Medium. I was like, how am I gonna tolerate, like, if I ever work at a company again, how am I ever gonna tolerate these, like, what I didn't even really remember, but I'm like, I remember they were not very good. And
Yeah,
and like
they're
these meetings are way better, but like how will I reintegrate into this like more normal meeting culture?
it's very hard, and it's um, you get this feeling, this clarity that not only could it be better, but that you're missing out on just time. It's just not productive. It's brutal,
Mm-hmm.
and it's in the beginning of the pandemic times, I had spent a lot of time helping out various organizations, and it'd be huge organizations. You'd be a meeting with like a Zoom meeting with 40 people, and everyone wants to participate. And what would end up happening is in the beginning, everyone would be excited because they're excited about this opportunity. And by the end, everyone would be muted and one person would be like preaching.
Yeah.
And it was not collaborative. But you knew that if one person had just said like, okay, I'm going to be the moderator. Does anyone want to take
Mm-hmm.
notes? And someone said, I'll take notes. And then that
Mm-hmm.
moderator went through and called on every single person, which in the beginning you're like, that doesn't make sense. Why would you call on everyone? You're like, but if you
Right.
just called on everyone and said, what do you want to talk about today? And they just
Mm-hmm.
said, this is what I'm here for. Because then everyone gets to say their piece about their thing. And it's like 3 minutes. And you're like, great. Are you done? Is tension resolved? Yep. Tension's resolved. Great.
Yeah,
Moving
I
on.
mean, the barrier to bring up any sort of item for a 50-person meeting, unless you're called on, is like huge, right? You're like, oh, I don't want to bother these people with like my small topic, right? Like,
Well, that's the perspective of a normal person, but the perspective of like the white tech bro guy is
right,
just like,
right,
fuck
right,
it, everyone's gonna listen to my topic right now, and then you have
right.
5 of those people, and then the meeting is a clusterfuck, and it's
That's
not
that's right.
productive, and it doesn't feel good, and then everyone else who is a normal person who's like, I don't think this is topical, is
Mhm.
quiet, and then their topic you never
Right.
get to it.
And then they have to it feels like a huge barrier both to bring up their topic and to cut someone off, right? It feels like if you don't have a culture and a structure where you have a facilitator that's like, that sounds like a separate agenda item. Should we add it to the end of the list? Then you're just like the random person who speaks up and is like, we are going way off topic. We're like, oh my,
Yeah.
like that's very
Yeah, so we did a couple things that we did, and these were hacks that we just kind of naturally fell into. So what we did is we made sure that the moderators would change around. So
Mhm.
except for a handful of meetings where I, as like the CEO, was a natural moderator, like an update meeting or what have you. Um, and then the moderators would change. And then we also were very deliberate about making sure that the note taker changed.
Yeah.
I had less issue about a moderator, like someone saying, I'll moderate. I had less issue about that person being over and over moderating, because what we found is that the people moderating the meetings were largely participating less in the meeting because they were moderating.
Mm,
And that actually was just a known thing. So like if it was something like, for instance, if the iOS developer was talking about the iOS thing, they probably didn't moderate that meeting, but
mhm.
someone close to the project would, and it would be no issue. But what we
Yeah.
did find as well is that the note takers would oftentimes, the same people would self volunteer, and
Mm,
oftentimes that would either be unconscious bias on the note taker self or ourselves pushing on that person
mhm.
that they should do it, a quiet person, or someone that, oh, you have great, you're good at notes, that type of thing,
Mhm.
which we were just like, that's bullshit, like,
And
so
they maybe have some people pleasing, like
yeah,
wanna, yeah.
right, right, exactly. And so we were just like, no. So we actually built well, not we, like we in the very collective we, like a tool appeared that someone just
Hmm.
hacked on that just was like a little spinner and just like picked who was taking notes. And this changed everything because then it was fun. And the meetings were never not fun. They were always engaging and fun, and they're fast and efficient. So people didn't hate them. But then it was like gambling as well. You're just like, ooh, who's going to be the note taker? And it was this fun thing. And I think actually,
Confetti.
I think it actually, I forgot.
You have it.
Well, I know. Well, I think there's it's, I'm gonna have to ask. Okay, I'll look for it in a second. But it's, it's, it's out there on the internet, so there's a tool that was built, and I know Range has this, which is really exciting.
Hmm.
But there's this whole thing of like, how do you how do you just pick this? And then we built it into Galactic, which is really exciting. So we
Hmm.
use our own, but it's
Yeah.
like this idea of like, how do you just pick this? So here, let me show you the Galactic one, which is really funny. The Galactic one is really funny because it's just using like this is it, ready? Let's see if it goes. There it is.
Oh my God.
Oh, Gory takes notes. Now, the best part about this is Gory, who is our COO. She has a theory that it picks
Thanks,
her
sir.
all the time. And every once in a while, I'll be like, "That's not true. It obviously doesn't pick you every time." And then we'll like run it again, and it'll pick her again. And it's like her versus the like JavaScript random function, um,
Yeah.
which is a very funny thing. But that is this fun thing in the beginning of the meetings. We just pop it up and it just spins. And
Hmm.
if someone's gone, we'll skip them or whatever. But it spins, and then once it's done, that person is just like, awesome, I'll take notes. And then they take notes, and everyone has a different style, but it largely follows the same kind of theme. The cool
Yeah.
part is the tactical agenda building in the beginning makes taking notes easy
Hmm.
because you don't have to have this like wandering, like, well, how the fuck am I going to capture everyone's
Right.
words?
You don't have to like, okay, is this a separate topic? Do I
Yeah.
like put it under this bullet point? Or yeah, I can show you. Let me see if I can pull this up. Um, this is one of our meetings. I'm on the established team. We have a collab meeting, a lot of similarities. So we don't have a spinner for the note taker. We may add that. But you can see we have a spinner for a check-in round. So we like to run a check-in round just to say like, hey, how are you doing? Is there anything you want to share? Which is really useful for people like, oh, my kid didn't sleep last night and I'm like,
Right.
I'm red. So that's one of the things we have is these like um mood indicators of like when people check in on Range, they get a mood indicator. So we go around the room, the virtual room, um, and then we have meeting actions to review. We build our agenda for the day, which is what you were talking about, right? So say I'm like, I wanted to add something about template spec. Oops. Right. And then when you get to that topic, so you go around the room. We have usually use the spinner to ask every person, do they have topics? And then once you're in the topics, then you add your notes here, right? So
Yeah.
like, and then it gets emailed out. We can add action items like email everyone a default template gene that shows up on my to-do list. And then at the end, once all these are processed, usually this takes like 30 minutes,
Yeah.
even if it's like a 10 15 person meeting. And then closing round, we do the same. We like go around the room, say, how are you feeling? And this is a really good place to get like feedback on the meeting as well, of like, what could have gone better. And people feel like pretty empowered to say things like, oh, that section didn't feel useful, because it's not like one person's meeting. It's like the team owns the
Yeah.
meeting. So that's kind of the Range version of tactical meetings. I know you have you also have an agenda.
Yeah, we have an agenda thing. And then, so the website is takingnotes.rocks.
Taking notes. Amazing. I'll share it in the show notes.
And this was made by one of the former Modest folks, and I don't even know who owns it anymore. And it might have even, I think it was redone and put on Taking Notes.rocks while we were at PayPal. But this is just a really simple way of just who's like picking a note taker. And I think it's really important that, especially as people who are running teams or building things, to think about the tools that you can use to like hack bias.
Yeah.
And like building out, I mean, it's a silly tool. It just chooses a person to take notes, but building out the tool that allows you to just avoid that little part of bias, whether self-imposed or externally imposed, like just saying, no, fuck it. Everyone has it. Everyone's taking notes. That's how it
Mm-hmm.
works. We're all working together, and we're going to do this together. And I think that's so important. So we also have a tool that's really fun, where we show we use our agenda on the screen. And so let me see if I have to make sure it's safe. Actually, I don't even know if it is safe, but let's see. We'll see soon enough. But the thing about the agenda that's been really fun is like, it's like this fun way of us to be able to
This is
say,
so
like,
cool.
here's this thing. So right now I'm showing you this agenda. This is
Mm-hmm.
typically for like the last one I used it for was our team meeting on Friday. So you can kind of
Mm-hmm.
go through this, and so you can see that, Dylan talked about the next week's sprint.
Mm-hmm.
Or talked about next week. Then he talked about the sprint, and then talked about kids. These are all things that were important for our team meeting. And then
Mm-hmm.
what's nice is like, so let's say he's talking about kids, I can actually demonstrate that we're talking about kids. And so that will be there. And then as we move on and we resolve that, then it goes, I forgot to do it correctly, but it'll show that this is next. So it'll say, okay, that one
Oh,
hasn't been
nice.
checked. And then if it's current, it will show, okay, we're talking about this now. And then if it's
Mm-hmm.
resolved, it just goes to resolved. And so it's a little extra work that we're kind of iterating on from the
Yeah.
moderator side. But what's really nice is that this is here, and we are all able to participate in this way where we build the agenda on the screen. It just appears, and then as we're talking about that, it becomes this like very nice way of of seeing that in a virtual way. And what we found is when we were at Modest, we had people in an office and we had people that were on a screen.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had to develop these tools that allowed the people on the screen to participate. But now in
Yeah.
this world, everyone's on a screen. And so we
Right.
were just like, let's just put it on the screen. Like we can put everything on the screen. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to do that. And so these tools are available with Galactic, so anyone can go check out on galactic.io. Well, not anyone, but you can sign up to maybe potentially check it out via our invite program.
I'll ask you for information if people are interested, or we can
Yeah.
add something to the description. So I mean, this makes me so happy because it's like, I don't know, it's just absurd to me that I ran a session for 1 hour like 8 years ago, and then you kind of latched on to these tactical meetings, and we've been kind of running them in these different paths for 8 years, and then now we've come both like working on these meeting tools. It's just like kind
Well,
of absurd and amazing that that experience was so impactful. And I'm curious, like, I think for a lot of people, if you're in the before mode, like, you don't really know you don't really know what you're missing. And I think it also feels pretty daunting to like completely change how you run meetings. Do you have any advice or thoughts for folks who want to experiment?
yes, of course. But first, I want to acknowledge, think of all the people that you've changed their lives, Gene. Like all of those people. Like if you think of all the people that I took, and like we ran meetings this way. We had 20 employees at Modest. They went to Snap, they went to Planet, they went to all these different companies. They're going to try and run these meetings like this. PayPal people, like all this stuff. Their lives have been changed for forever, just for that one
Didn't even
session.
know until we
Yeah.
reconnected.
And I do want to reiterate. I just want to say, like, if you have an idea, not just obviously this, but like if you have an
Mhm,
idea and you think this is going to help people, like share it. Because I would never
mhm.
have known this if you wouldn't have put up that session, which may have
Yeah,
seemed silly at the time. Oh, this is something I'm excited about. Let's see what happens.
yeah.
But it
I
really
almost
did
didn't run it.
change. Yeah.
I almost didn't run it because I was like, oh, like food camp, like, do I really belong here? There's a lot of big names. Like, what do I have to share? And I was like, I remember standing in front of that board and being like, no, this is something I think I could do. And maybe it would be cool to run it as a tactical meeting. And I kind of like pushed myself to do it and like, got that like nervous excitement when you kind of step out of your comfort zone. So
Yeah,
I'm glad I did it.
it really did change, and I think the what we found about like getting that stuff done, or like doing change is, um, you have to be. I think for us, since we wanted to make it our workspace more accessible to everyone, we
Mhm.
were willing to take the cost to like try it. And
Mhm.
I'm trying to say that very carefully because I think it's important. When we looked at this, it was clear that more people would participate equally, which was important.
Mm.
Um, and that was something that we wanted to build all of our teams around this idea. And I think oftentimes we say that, but we don't act it. And this was a way
Mhm.
that seemed very easy to act, where we are trying to defeat some of the bias of the regular meetings of how we act around
Mhm.
each other. We're trying to make it so everyone has a similar voice,
Mhm.
or an opportunity to talk. What the best part about it as well is the opportunity to talk doesn't mean you have to talk. I, as a CEO,
Mhm.
often will pass. I won't say anything.
Yeah.
Like, and it's like, and I think that it's the implicit bias in both directions of that a person who's quiet doesn't have anything to say, and the person that
Right.
loud has something to say, right? We think oftentimes, oh, the loud person, they're always going to talk. Well, like I love sitting in these meetings and hearing the team say, oh, what about this? And then let's talk through it. Like it's great
Yeah.
without having to be the one that brings it up. And
But
so I think,
the choice is to opt out, not to opt in. Like you're not
right,
putting the onus on people to be like, hey, I have an important topic I want to
right.
talk about.
And
Yeah.
it's just like, Gene, do you have a topic? And it's like, or attention. And it's like, oh, no, pass. It's like, okay, great. And then
Hmm.
you might later,
Yeah.
which is great. So it's like this thing. But for us, because it was so related to the vision we had for how we wanted our teams to be fundamentally, it
Hmm.
wasn't hard for us to take a stab at it.
Hmm.
And when we tried this at PayPal, it was much harder because PayPal did not have that same vision. So
Mm.
what we did is we started doing it with our, kind of like our team check-in meetings, these big
Hmm.
meetings with 40 people. And we would do it there because it was super efficient and very quick and just saved a lot
Hmm.
of time. Then we would try moving it to smaller meetings. Um, so that's the type of thing that I would maybe recommend, is try it in a meeting where
Mm.
you can, and I think it's maybe, I'm saying it differently than maybe other people would recommend, because they might recommend doing it in small meetings. But I also
Yeah.
think if you can demonstrate that it works in a meeting that typically people think is a waste of time, then people will be super stoked about bringing it to a
Yeah.
meeting that is highly productive.
That's true because you took something that was 3 hours and then made
Yeah.
it effective in 30 minutes. So it's like super clear the value, right? So if someone can
Oh my
find
gosh.
like the worst meeting and then
Yeah.
be like, hey, why don't we try this? Like nothing to lose. It's already terrible, right? Like
Right.
plug that
Right.
in there.
And as a leader, what I loved is it didn't make the meeting less effective. In fact, it made it more effective. Like
Mhm.
sometimes I think I had mistaken like the length or intensity of a meeting with the effectiveness of the meeting. And
Yeah.
what we had instead was this meeting that was highly documented, that had action items that came out of it, or none, The action that could have been reporting, people could just be reporting instead of strong action items that came out of it.
Yeah.
But it still was very highly informational. And then, um, afterwards, you were like, "Oh, that was great." What might have been 20 minutes. Like, so right now we have a team of 8 people. Sometimes our like Friday check-in meetings, which is our bigger meeting, is 20 minutes. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's an hour. But if it's an hour, it's because we're really talking about some stuff that we need to talk about. But most of the time it's 20 minutes. And then what that
Yeah.
means is, because it's later on a Friday, we just kind of like chat a bit, hang out for a little while,
Yeah.
and I love the range idea of just play a game, and I think
Yeah,
that's
we have a 1 hour product collab and like probably half the time we finish in half an hour, which is like I think without this meeting format is unheard of, right? Like that you would finish early, like a whole
I
half
know,
hour early.
right?
So we often finish half hour early and then the facilitator actually has an action to say thumbs up for game time or thumbs up for time back because I think I felt bad thumbs downing game time because it felt like such a
I hate
like a
games.
downer thing to do. So I was like, we just need 2 thumbs up, like thumbs up for game time or thumbs up for time back, and then people who want to play games stay for the extra
Yep.
half hour or 20 minutes, and it's awesome.
That's I think that optionality of making work less aggressively work by making work very tactical. Like I think it's this funny thing of like,
Yes, because I remember maybe it was at that session or maybe another session, someone was like, well, I like to connect with my coworkers. Like, I like to have some chit chat about my weekend or like
mhm,
what's going on at home. I'm like, yeah, do that outside of the meeting, right? Like,
yep,
do that as
right,
you're coming in, do that as you're walking out or you're like leaving, or find some like explicit time to have that
yeah,
chit chat and social connection. But like, you don't need to take up 10 people's time
yeah.
doing that, which I'm sure it feels good, but like, it's just
If
not
it's so
effective.
important, you can bring it up as attention in the meeting,
That's true.
right? Like if, and
Right.
that's I think the thing is it changes the
Yeah.
perspective of this is a topic that everyone cares about to like this is a topic that's going to be on the agenda on the notes, and
Yeah.
like I actually think everyone does care about it. So how was your weekend? That's my topic.
Hmm.
And then when it
Yeah.
comes to you, you can just do that, and it's like, but it's deliberate and it's
Yeah.
part of the plan instead of this kind of disruptive like how's everyone's weekend? Like, and it's like, okay,
Yeah.
cool.
And then
Because
you also
I,
then only get the loud people talking about their weekend as well, right? Like,
right,
we have a
right.
Friday, a lot of our Friday meetings have a checkout or a closing round where we literally go around the room with that spinner and say, what's one thing you're looking forward to on your weekend? And like, we get to hear all these fun plans people have that like we wouldn't have heard if it was just like, hey, anyone got any weekend plans? You'd get like 2 people, going on
Mhm.
and on about their plans and everyone kind of like sitting back, right?
Right. And that's exactly. And that's, I think there's so much about making work more productive that often is just about, it's just boring. And and meetings can be dynamic, but they don't have to be boring. They don't have to be long.
Yeah.
They can just be efficient. And I think efficiency, when I think this is my technically my second venture-backed company that I've founded.
Hmm.
And when I think about what I value about the teams, it's almost the most important thing is efficiency.
Hmm.
And I think about that because I want to be able to bring people onto the team, and I want to be able for them to have a job where they work the amount of time they think is appropriate to get
Yeah.
their work done, and hopefully that allows them to spend time with their families, etc. But also I want them to not waste time. And I don't know if this
Yeah.
is just me aging and realizing that I'm going to die someday, or because all our parents are dying, or whatever it might be, where I'm suddenly like, we're all going to die. But I think that there's the only thing that we can't get back is time. And I
Yeah.
oftentimes think when we're in these meetings and we're like, oh, I hate this meeting. It's so long. It's so boring.
Yeah.
It's like the opportunity to make these things so efficient and also productive, and also with a high amount of information that comes out that is then spun out to the rest of the company.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And that is the key. And so that's something that, especially when we had a bigger team where we had more discrete meetings instead of right now where it's just like basically the meetings are all just everyone. So it's like, so those have
Yeah.
to be very specific, very productive, highly. But once it starts spinning out where you're like, okay, the design sprint meeting started where they're kind of talking about this week in design. It's like, great. Now I, as a CEO, can just be doing CEO stuff, but then also get the same update that largely they got. And so then
Hmm.
if there's a flag or something, I can go to the next meeting. Like
Right.
it's like this thing, and then I will just be like, oh hey, I saw this note. That's my tension. I'll add it to the list, and then it'll be called on me. It's not this
Hmm.
disruptive thing. It's not as parachuting in because you have context. You have context of
Right.
weeks, of months of data, and so it's wonderful. Um, I do like now though that we're not past holacracy, but it seems that this has moved into like these meetings are awesome more so than here's a weird productivity cult.
Yes.
And
Yes. Yeah.
that's
We're
important
just
because
taking the meetings part and we're like, this part is great. Let's
yeah,
just do that.
yeah. And it's like if you want to do holacracy, cool, there's lots of resources and it seems
Yeah.
great. But
Yeah.
the meetings are accessible to everyone.
Yeah. Well, I like to end these chats on a maybe tactical piece of advice for our listeners. Do you have anything that comes to mind of like one thing you wish people would do?
Just in the whole world?
Could be related to the topic, but
Okay, okay, okay,
could
okay.
be general too.
Um, I think the one thing that changed our entire perspective about this, and this probably happened in the time between us starting doing tactical meetings and ending, or probably middle of the Obama campaign, when we straight realized that we had just fucked up on diversity. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Everything you do internal to your company, whether it is like leadership movements, like how you act as a leader, or whether it is the tooling that you choose, um,
Mm-hmm.
is a deliberate choice to either include or exclude people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the thing that we have thought a lot about is when you think about accessibility, you think about like statements like "you're not a culture fit." Like culture is never used to include; it's always used to exclude. It seems, and it's like all of
Mm-hmm.
these things are deliberate decisions where we think we're talking about um, inclusion, but we're actually talking about exclusion.
Yeah.
And I think that that extends to tooling, and that's one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that extends to how you run your meetings. And it's such a
Yeah.
silly thing, but we had such a big impact of people who never had a chance to have a voice, whether it was the junior
Mm-hmm.
engineer that came from a boot camp who no one would hire, or whether it was the
Mm-hmm.
person that was like the office manager who never had felt they had a say. Everyone had this voice where they could chime in on something that may not be related, may be related, may be the most important statement of the day,
Mm-hmm.
may change the entire company. And that was so important to see. And I would just recommend that everyone kind of does an audit of the tooling
Yeah. Take a
of like,
critical look
and just think,
of who
is
you're
this
including and excluding. Yeah.
right? Right. And sometimes exclusion is important, like but
Mm-hmm.
as long as you're doing it deliberately, as long as
Right.
you know it, rather than just assuming that it's inclusive, but actually it is exclusive.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you so much, Harper. I think this will be very interesting to people. They'll
Hopefully.
have a before and after moment as well.
Oh man, you've changed everyone's life, Gene.
Thanks, Harper.